One of the questions we get asked a lot is how exactly do you target different levels of HR and where do you really focus in on? And so it really depends from company to company the way that you approach your targeting. But for the most part, I see companies really struggle with targeting HR at different levels of employee size. So I'll just give you a couple examples. So pretend you're a training company and you're trying to sell leadership development training. So there are job titles like leadership development, organizational development, learning, training, talent development, all those titles that in theory could buy your product or service. But for most organizations, until they get to a certain size, the HR function just isn't very big. So under 1,000 employees, you're going to see VPs of HR, you're going to see directors of HR, you're going to see recruiting most likely. But under 1,000 employees, unless it's a software company or a really, high growing kind of fast company, you don't start to see all the different segmentations on the talent development side. So you're typically not going to have a chief learning officer, directors of learning, directors of training, leadership development, all of those people. And so what that means is for those companies under 1,000 employees, the VPs of HR, the directors of HR, kind of all of those people are making the decisions. And so it makes it difficult because that means that they're also making decisions on recruiting products and talent and assessments and onboarding and regulations and kind of everything that HR does. And so typically, if companies say that they want to target smaller companies, you typically need to build a strategy around going at VPs of HRs, trying to talk to their assistants and understand who exactly handles what. You have to do a lot of LinkedIn research. So for example, in companies under 1,000 employees, there's a ton of directors of HR. Well, with the title director of HR, it's almost impossible to tell exactly what that person does unless they list it on their LinkedIn profile or you hear from someone else in the organization that you need to talk to so-and-so about learning and training. That's really their focus. There's not going to be typically a chief learning officer or head of learning in smaller companies. And so the strategies really differ. When you're targeting companies under 1,000, it's about trying to understand who exactly are the right people and who handles what, because their job titles typically won't tell them. When you have a company that has 10,000 employees, usually it's pretty broken out. They have talent development, they have learning and development, they have all of these different subsets. And so your outreach strategy really changes. If it's the chief learning officer and you're selling training and it's a fairly small learning group, you're either going to go at them or leadership development or talent management or one of those functions. So you really have to think about the size of the company. You have to think of the size of the HR team. And based on that information, kind of figure out how busy that person is. What's the chance of you getting them on the phone? What's the chance of them responding to an email? And how do you kind of gather the right information, even as a starting point to figure out who to go to? So it's something that we see quite a bit when you're targeting HR, really thinking about segmenting by employee size and segmenting by the size of the organization. And there are lots of ways to figure out that information, just how big the HR function is. You can use, obviously, Talent View to do that. You can use LinkedIn research. There's lots of different ways to understand based on employee size and the size of the HR group exactly who you should be targeting and what those tactics should be.